Arthur lived a quiet life. He woke before the sun, made a simple breakfast of oatmeal, and read the local paper on his small porch swing as the first light touched the sleepy town of Harmony Creek. He was an old man, lines etched around kind eyes, hands that trembled sometimes when he held his coffee cup, but were steady as stone when he was polishing the worn wood of his porch railing. He wore simple clothes, kept to himself, and was, by all appearances, just another elderly resident fading into the background of a changing world. For years, Harmony Creek had been just that, harmonious. A place where people knew their neighbors, kids rode bikes down tree-lined streets, and the biggest drama was the annual bake-off winner. But lately, a different kind of energy had settled over the town, like a dark cloud gathering on the horizon. It started subtly. More strangers hanging around the edges of town, expensive, aggressive cars parked where they shouldn't be. Then came the spray-painted symbols on walls, the sudden decline of certain businesses, the quiet fear in people's eyes when asked about it. A group calling themselves the Serpents had slithered into Harmony Creek, and they were tightening their coils around the town's throat. They weren't just petty thugs, they were organized, ruthless, and quickly making it clear they intended to control everything. Their leader, a man named Victor, was rarely seen, but his reputation for cruelty preceded him, spreading through whispers and veiled threats. Arthur watched. He didn't say much. He saw the fear, the helplessness. He saw the sheriff, a good man named Brody, doing his best but clearly outmanned and out-resourced. Arthur felt the familiar, low thrum beneath his skin, a feeling he hadn't acknowledged in decades. A readiness. A deep, buried capability that felt both foreign and as natural as breathing. But he ignored it. He was retired. He had found peace. He wanted to keep it. One afternoon, Arthur was at the town's only grocery store, picking up essentials. He moved slowly, methodically, navigating the aisles with practiced ease. At the checkout counter, he carefully placed his few items on the belt: milk, bread, a can of stew. The young woman behind him in line huffed, shifting her weight impatiently. She had bright, aggressive eyes and wore clothes that seemed too flashy for Harmony Creek. She tapped her foot rapidly. As the cashier scanned Arthur's items, Arthur fumbled slightly, reaching for his wallet. It was a conscious choice, a small test of patience. The young woman behind him scoffed, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Oh my God, move it, Grandpa," she snapped, her voice grating. "Some of us have places to be. Are you trying to be slow?" Arthur paused, his hand still resting on his wallet in his back pocket. He turned his head slightly, meeting her aggressive gaze with his calm, steady one. There was no anger in his eyes, only a quiet, unnerving stillness. "Respect is earned, young lady," Arthur said, his voice low and even, barely above a whisper. "Patience is a virtue." She let out a harsh laugh. "Patience? For you? Get real. Just hurry up." A few other customers looked away, uncomfortable. The cashier, a nervous teenager, avoided eye contact. Suddenly, a voice cut through the tension. "Having trouble there, sir?" It was Sheriff Brody. He had just entered the store and had seen the exchange. He walked over, his presence immediately changing the atmosphere. He nodded respectfully at Arthur. "Sheriff," Arthur acknowledged, a faint, almost imperceptible shift in his posture. Brody looked at the young woman. "Is there a problem, miss?" "Yeah, this guy's taking forever," she whined. "He's too slow." Brody's expression remained neutral, but his eyes held a steely glint. "Everyone moves at their own pace." "Let me get that for you, Arthur," he turned to the cashier. "Just add his groceries to mine." The young woman's jaw dropped slightly, surprised by the sheriff's intervention and apparent familiarity with the old man. Arthur gave Brody a small, genuine smile. "That's kind of you, Sheriff," Arthur said. "Just doing what's right," Brody replied, giving the young woman a pointed look before turning his back to her. The young woman muttered something under her breath about busybodies and stormed out of the store, letting the door slam behind her. Arthur paid the sheriff back in cash from his wallet, his movements now precise, not fumbling at all. The sheriff didn't refuse the money, respecting Arthur's quiet dignity. "Thank you again, Sheriff," Arthur said as they finished. "Any time, Arthur," Brody replied. He paused, lowering his voice slightly. "See a lot of that attitude lately. Folks think they own the place." He glanced towards the door the young woman had exited. "Keep an eye out, all right? Things feel volatile." Arthur's gaze held the sheriff's. "I'll do that, Sheriff." Arthur left the grocery store, the small bag of groceries in his hand feeling light. The encounter with the young woman was trivial, a simple display of common rudeness exacerbated by the general tension in town. But her attitude, her sense of entitlement, was a symptom of the disease that was spreading through Harmony Creek, the serpents. He walked down the sidewalk, the familiar route home. He passed the diner, usually bustling, now half empty. He saw a few figures loitering near the hardware store, arms crossed, watching people with unsettling intensity. Serpents. As he turned onto his street, two men stepped out from behind a parked car, blocking his path. They were rough-looking, wearing the serpent's crude symbol, a coiled snake, on their jackets. One of them had a nasty scar across his cheek. They were the low-level enforcers, the muscles sent to lean on people. "Hey old man," Scarface sneered, his voice rough. "Heard you got the sheriff paying for your groceries. Think you're special?" The other man, bigger and silent, cracked his knuckles. Arthur stopped, his groceries hanging loosely in his hand. He looked at them, his expression calm, almost weary. "Gentlemen," he said softly. "Gentlemen?" Scarface laughed. "Look at this geezer. Think you can talk to us like that?" He took a step forward, reaching out a hand as if to shove Arthur. "Maybe we should teach you some manners." This was different from the grocery store. This was the manifestation of the gang's casual cruelty and need to dominate. This was the moment the quiet man had to decide. The thrum beneath his skin intensified, no longer ignored, but acknowledged. This wasn't just about disrespect, it was about a poison spreading, and he was standing directly in its path. Scarface's hand shot out. Arthur didn't move fast. Not in a blur, but with an almost imperceptible, hyper-efficient shift of weight. He dropped the grocery bag. His left hand deflected the wrist with minimal force, turning the man's momentum. His right hand, a millisecond later, delivered a short, sharp strike just below the rib cage. It wasn't a punch, it was a focused impact from a lifetime of practiced power generation. Scarface gasped, the air knocked out of him. He stumbled back, clutching his side, eyes wide with surprise and pain. The bigger man reacted, swinging a wild haymaker. Arthur tilted his head slightly, letting the blow whistle past his ear. He stepped inside the man's guard, his movement fluid, almost dance-like despite his age. One hand seized the wrist of the swinging arm, redirecting it. The other found a specific point on the man's forearm, pressing down hard as he twisted the arm. A choked cry of pain. The big man folded, dropping to his knees, cradling his arm. It was over in less than 3 seconds. Scarface was still doubled over, wheezing. The big man was whimpering on the ground. Arthur stood straight, his chest not even heaving, his face impassive. The only sign of exertion was the slight clenching of his jaw. His groceries lay scattered on the sidewalk, a broken egg, spilled milk soaking into the concrete. He looked down at the two men. "You should reconsider your career choices," he said, his voice still soft, but now carrying an undeniable weight of quiet authority. "And learn to earn respect." He didn't linger. He bent, calmly retrieved his unbroken items, righted the milk carton though the milk was lost, and picked up the torn grocery bag. He left the two serpents writhing on the sidewalk, their arrogance shattered by 3 seconds of understated, precise violence. They scrambled back to their boss, Victor. They were shaken, bruised, and terrified. Scarface clutched his ribs, the big man gingerly moved his arm. He just, Scarface stammered, still trying to catch his breath. He wasn't even fast. But, like he knew exactly where to hit. Didn't even look like he was trying. Victor sat in the back room of the derelict bar they'd taken over as their headquarters. He was a man in his late 30s, sharp-featured, with cold, dead eyes and a perpetual sneer. He projected an aura of casual menace, leaning back in a salvaged armchair, swirling whiskey in a glass. "Spit it out, you idiots," Victor snarled, impatient. "The old man, boss," the big man finally managed. "The one from the store. We tried to lean on him like you said, teach him a lesson." Victor leaned forward, a flicker of interest in his eyes. "And? You rough him up?" "No, boss," Scarface wheezed. "He roughs us up. Didn't even use a weapon. Just, moved. Like not human fast, but human perfect. Put me down with one tap." The big guy's arm, he trailed off, grimacing. Victor slammed his glass down. Whiskey splashed onto the table. "An old man? You're telling me two of my best enforcers got handled by a grandpa?" His voice was low, dangerous. "Boss, I swear," the big man pleaded. "He ain't normal. He felt dangerous. Like nothing I ever felt." Victor stood up, pacing. His initial reaction was disbelief, then fury. Who was this old man? He couldn't have some random geezer humiliating his crew. It sent the wrong message. It showed weakness. "Find out who he is," Victor ordered, his voice hardening. "Find out everything. And when you do, we don't just lean on him. We make an example. A brutal, public example. Make sure the whole damn town sees what happens when you mess with the serpents." His sneer returned, colder than before. "Maybe he wasn't fast, but he'll wish he was slower when we're done with him." Arthur knew he had just painted a target on his back. That was the point. He couldn't stand by while the town withered under the gang's fear. The grocery store incident, the sheriff's quiet decency, the subsequent confrontation, it had crystallized something in him. He wasn't just Arthur, the quiet old man, anymore. He was reactivating a part of himself he had buried deep. A necessary part. He spent the next few days quietly gathering information. He didn't use the internet much, preferring old-school methods. He observed the gang's patterns, noted their vehicles, the places they frequented, the individuals they interacted with. He saw how fear paralyzed people, how even small acts of defiance were met with swift, disproportionate retaliation. He needed allies. He started with Sheriff Brody. He visited the sheriff's office late one evening. Brody was tired, files spread across his desk. "Arthur," Brody said, surprised but not unwelcome. "Come on in." Arthur sat, the old chair creaking softly. "Sheriff, we need to talk about the serpents. And what happened the other day." Brody leaned back, eyes narrowing slightly. "The boys you handled, you mean? They reported it. Said you were some kind of ninja grandpa." He offered a tired smile that didn't reach his eyes. "They weren't the first. We've had whispers about someone hitting their lowlifes when they're shaking down businesses, things that don't add up to regular folks fighting back." Arthur met his gaze directly. "Sheriff, I haven't been entirely honest about my past. I spent a considerable amount of time in places where dealing with groups like the Serpents was part of the job description." Brody studied him. He saw the quiet confidence, the alert eyes that missed nothing, the hands that, while aged, held a latent power. He'd seen enough in his years of service to recognize competence, even if it was cloaked in an unassuming package. "How considerable?" "Let's just say," Arthur replied calmly, "I retired with a specific, and rather rare, skill set. One designed for intricate problems." He didn't elaborate, and Brody didn't press. He understood the implication. Special operations. Deep cover. Things the average cop only saw in movies. They're escalating, Sheriff, Arthur continued. They won't let what happened slide. They'll come for me, and they'll probably try to use the town to get to me. You can't fight them with just your deputies and standard procedure. They're too entrenched, too willing to use extreme violence. Brody sighed, running a hand over his face. I know, Arthur. I'm doing what I can, but every time I touch one of their operations, they hit back harder somewhere else. Businesses get vandalized, people get hurt. There's even talk of corruption reaching higher up, making it hard for me to get state help. You need a different kind of help, Arthur said. A less official kind. He leaned forward slightly. You know anyone in town? Someone reliable, maybe with a background that isn't common knowledge. Someone who hates what's happening as much as we do. Brody thought for a moment. There's Frank at the auto shop. Quiet guy. Ex-Marine Recon, Purple Heart. Keeps to himself, but I've seen him stare down a couple of those serpents. And Sarah, runs the diner. Lost her husband a few years back, fought off a robbery attempt last month with nothing but a frying pan and pure grit. She's tough. He paused. And there's Mrs. Gable at the library. Most folks think she's just a sweet old lady, but I heard she was Army intelligence back in the day. Sharp as a tack, amazing with computers. Arthur nodded slowly. A picture was forming. A Marine, a tough civilian, a former intelligence operative, and a sheriff willing to bend the rules for the greater good. It wasn't a full team, but it was a start. These were principled people, the backbone of the town, exactly the kind the serpents preyed upon and exactly the kind who would fight back if given a chance and a leader. That's our core, Arthur said. The sheriff provides intel and cover where he can. Frank provides muscle and tactical expertise. Sarah, resilience and community connection. Mrs. Gable, information. Over the next few days, Arthur quietly met with each person. He was direct, explaining the threat and the need for unconventional methods. He didn't make demands, but offered a path forward, a way to fight back effectively. Frank, initially stoic, agreed after hearing how the serpents had threatened Sarah's diner. Sarah needed no convincing, her eyes blazed with righteous anger. Mrs. Gable, surprisingly spry, immediately saw the logic and the potential for a data-driven approach. They formed an unlikely alliance, meeting in the back of Frank's darkened garage or in Mrs. Gable's cluttered library after closing. Arthur, drawing on decades of experience, outlined the principles of asymmetric warfare: hit where they were weak, disrupt their operations, make their control costly and dangerous, sow distrust within their ranks, and isolate the leader. While Arthur's group was forming, Victor was fuming. His enforcers couldn't find the old man. He was like a ghost. This infuriated him. He was used to people cowering. He ordered his men to increase pressure across town. Businesses that hadn't paid protection were vandalized. Anyone seen talking to Sheriff Brody or Frank was harassed. The atmosphere of fear tightened its grip. The serpents were making it clear that resistance was futile and painful. One night, they firebombed a small shop owned by an elderly couple who had refused to pay. The town watched, horrified and helpless, as the flames consumed the building. This act of brutal, senseless violence hardened the resolve of Arthur's nascent team and shocked others in town into realizing the true nature of the threat. This wasn't just about money anymore, it was about terror. They crossed a line, Frank said, his face grim, watching the smoke rise. They wanted to send a message, Sarah added, her voice tight with suppressed fury. They just sent the wrong one. Mrs. Gable, usually calm, nodded sharply. This changes the parameters. We need to act faster. And we need more leverage. Arthur looked at his allies, seeing not fear, but a cold, determined anger. This was the moment of commitment, of understanding the true stakes. They want fear, Arthur said quietly. We give them courage. We show this town that they don't have to live like this." He looked at each of them. "Are you in?" Knowing this just got a lot more dangerous. "We're in, Arthur," Brody said, his hand resting on his sidearm. "They want a war. We'll give them one they didn't sign up for." The others nodded in agreement. The time for planning in shadows was ending. The time for action had arrived. Before we dive deeper into Arthur's plan and the fight for Harmony Creek, let us know where you are watching this story from. Drop your location in the comments below. It helps us understand our community and how far these stories of quiet strength and standing up to bullies are reaching. And if you are enjoying it, please subscribe to our channel. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, and your support means the world. Now, back to Harmony Creek and the serpents. Arthur's plan was audacious, relying on speed, precision, and the element of surprise. It wasn't about meeting the serpents head-on in a slugging match they were equipped for, but disrupting their systems, undermining their authority, and cutting off their resources before they could react effectively. Using Mrs. Gable's incredible ability to sift through digital detritus and chatter, they identified several key points in the serpent's operation: a house on the edge of town used as a drug stash and distribution hub, a crooked auto repair shop laundering money, and a schedule for their protection payment collections. Their first move targeted the stash house. Frank, using his knowledge of infiltration and silent movement, confirmed the layout and number of guards. Under the cover of darkness, Arthur, Frank, and two other veterans Frank had quietly vetted and brought into the fold, moved like ghosts. This wasn't a raid, it was a demolition job. They didn't engage the guards directly, using stealth and diversion tactics Arthur had perfected in countless past operations. While Frank and the others created a noisy diversion on one side of the house, Arthur, moving with uncanny silence for a man his age, breached the rear. Inside, he located the stash. He didn't steal it. Instead, using a carefully prepared mixture, he rendered the drugs unusable without causing a fire or explosion that would alert the neighborhood. It was precise, surgical sabotage. They were in and out in minutes, leaving behind only worthless powder and the faint smell of chemicals. Meanwhile, Mrs. Gable, working from the safety of her library basement, executed a digital assault. She targeted the gang's rudimentary online communication channels and financial records, scrambling data, creating false orders, and generally sowing chaos and mistrust. Sheriff Brody played his part by strategically delaying patrols or directing them away from areas where Arthur's team was operating, while also quietly gathering evidence of the serpent's other crimes that could be used later. Sarah's Diner became a vital hub for communication and support, a safe place where allies could share information and rest, hidden in plain sight. She also used her network of contacts in town to spread quiet word of small victories, undermining the fear and building a sense of hope. These initial strikes weren't massive confrontations, but they were highly effective disruptions. The serpents woke up to ruined product, garbled communications, and missing money. Their street-level dealers were confused and angry. Trust began to erode. Victor was furious. The mysterious sabotage was costing him money and making him look weak in front of his crew and, more importantly, his suppliers further up the chain. He didn't know who was hitting him, but the timing felt tied to the old man. He doubled down on security, increased intimidation in town, and ordered his lieutenants to find whoever was responsible and make them pay. The counterattack was swift and brutal. The serpents, unable to identify the source of the attacks, lashed out blindly but violently. They targeted businesses they suspected might be harboring the resistance, including Frank's auto shop and, more daringly, tried to intimidate customers at Sarah's Diner during broad daylight. One afternoon, 3 serpent thugs swaggered into the diner. Sarah stood firm, telling them to leave. They overturned tables, smashed plates, and grabbed Sarah, threatening her. Frank, who was having coffee at the counter, reacted instantly. The Marine recon training kicked in. He moved with controlled fury, engaging the thugs. Arthur, seated in a booth, didn't hesitate either. The quiet diner erupted into a brief, violent melee. Frank handled two with brutal efficiency, while Arthur, using the close quarters to his advantage, disabled the third with minimal effort, a blur of controlled movement. They left the thugs bruised and bleeding, the diner in shambles. Sarah was shaken but unharmed. The incident, witnessed by several customers, was terrifying, but it also galvanized the town. Seeing Sarah and Frank fight back, seeing Arthur's quiet but devastating effectiveness, sparked something. The community, long living in fear, began to push back in small ways. People who had seen something called the sheriff's tip line, Brody made sure it was anonymous. Businesses started quietly supporting Sarah's diner, helping her clean up. Neighbors watched out for each other. The serpent's attempt to instill more fear had, ironically, started to erode it, replacing it with quiet defiance and solidarity. They wanted to break us, Sarah said later, sweeping up broken glass, her hands steady despite the tremor in her voice. They just showed us we're stronger together. Mrs. Gable's intel became even more critical. She intercepted a message indicating Victor was bringing in outside help, professional enforcers from a larger criminal enterprise he was connected to. This was Victor's major move, revealing the wider network and raising the stakes dramatically. He saw Arthur and his allies as a significant threat now and was committing more resources to crush them. The quiet resistance had become a full-blown war, attracting attention from higher up the criminal food chain. This isn't just about Harmony Creek anymore, Brody said, reviewing the intel Mrs. Gable had provided. These guys, they're serious. Cartel serious, maybe. Arthur's expression was grim. He recognized the names, the methods implied. This was indeed an escalation he had anticipated, but it raised the level of necessary force considerably. Then we finish this before they get fully established, he stated. We hit Victor directly. Cut the head off the snake. Their planning session grew more intense. They knew Victor was holed up in the old abandoned factory on the edge of town, heavily guarded. A direct assault would be suicide. Arthur outlined a different approach, a lure. They would create a situation Victor, with his arrogance and need for control, couldn't ignore. The plan involved leveraging the serpent's own methods against them. They knew the next major, protection, collection run was happening soon, targeting the entire Main Street business district. This was a key revenue stream and a very public display of Victor's power. Arthur's team would disrupt it completely, not just by stopping the collectors, but by seizing the money and making it disappear in a way that directly challenged Victor. Frank and his veteran friends would intercept the collection teams at staggered points, using overwhelming force and speed to neutralize them and secure the money. Mrs. Gable would simultaneously launch a sophisticated cyber attack, locking Victor out of his digital assets and communications just as the disruptions began, isolating him. Sarah and other trusted townspeople would create diversions and provide lookouts along the main street. The bait for Victor was the money itself. Arthur knew Victor wouldn't trust anyone else to recover a large sum of seized cash. He would come himself. The location for the trap was the abandoned factory, familiar ground for the serpents, but Arthur and his team would turn its complex layout into their advantage. The night of the operation was tense. A quiet hum settled over Harmony Creek, the usual evening sounds muted. The air crackled with anticipation. Frank and his team moved first, hitting the collection points with swift, brutal efficiency. They were ghosts of the past, utilizing skills honed in distant, forgotten conflicts. Collectors were disarmed, zip-tied, and left for the sheriff's deputies to find later. The money was secured. Simultaneously, Mrs. Gable initiated her cyber attack. Lights flickered at the factory. Victor's computer screens went black. His encrypted phone buzzed uselessly. He was cut off. Word of the disrupted collections reached the factory guards via runners or panicked calls from low-level thugs. Victor received fragmented, confusing reports, his men were down, the money was gone, communications were cut. Fury boiled within him. This was more than just resistance, it was an organized, coordinated attack. And he knew, instinctively, who was behind it. The old man. Ignoring the warnings of his remaining lieutenants, driven by pride and rage, Victor gathered his personal guard and prepared to leave the factory to hunt down the old man and reclaim what was his. This was exactly what Arthur had gambled on. As Victor and his men exited the factory's main administrative building, they were met not by a frontal assault, but by silence. The complex was vast, filled with decaying machinery, abandoned offices, and long, dark corridors. It was a labyrinth, and Arthur's team had learned its secrets. Arthur, Frank, and their core group were already inside, moving through the shadows, utilizing service tunnels and catwalks. This was their element, asymmetrical warfare, close-quarters combat, using the environment as a weapon. The final confrontation was not a single, massive battle, but a series of brutal, contained engagements throughout the factory complex. Arthur's team didn't just fight, they hunted. They used the darkness, the noise of the old building, and their superior knowledge of the layout to isolate and neutralize groups of serpents. Frank's team secured the perimeter and prevented reinforcements. Mrs. Gable, even from the library, provided vital real-time information gleaned from surveillance feeds they had hacked and fragmented serpent communications. Sarah, though not physically present in the factory, was coordinating with the townspeople, ensuring no one stumbled into the danger zone and preparing aid stations if needed. Sheriff Brody and his deputies were staged nearby, ready to move in once the fighting stopped, providing legal backup and ensuring no one escaped. Arthur moved with a focused intensity, a ghost in the machine. He wasn't as fast as a young man, but every movement was precise, economical, and devastatingly effective. He relied on leverage, pain points, and a chilling understanding of anatomy. He moved through the factory like a predator, dispatching serpents in quiet, brutal bursts of violence. He finally found Victor in the main assembly hall, surrounded by his remaining elite guards. Victor's face was a mask of rage and desperation. He saw Arthur emerge from the shadows, the quiet old man from the grocery store, and couldn't reconcile the image with the devastation that had been wrought upon his empire. "You!" Victor roared, pulling a handgun. "I'll kill you myself, old man." Arthur didn't speak. He moved. The distance closed in seconds. A guard lunged. Arthur sidestepped, deflected, a sharp strike to the temple. The guard crumpled. Victor fired wildly. Arthur flowed around the shots, using cover, closing the distance with unnerving calm. It wasn't a fair fight. Victor was a thug with a gun, Arthur was a master of lethal force refined over decades. Victor relied on intimidation, Arthur relied on skill. When Arthur finally reached him, the fight lasted mere seconds. Victor was disarmed, then incapacitated with a series of quick, painful movements that left him helpless on the floor, gasping for air. Arthur stood over him, chest rising and falling evenly. His eyes were clear, focused. "You built your power on fear and disrespect," Arthur said, his voice devoid of emotion. "True strength isn't taking what you want. It's protecting what you value. Respect isn't demanded. It's earned." Frank and the others arrived, securing the remaining guards. The factory fell silent, save for the groans of defeated men and the distant wail of approaching sirens. Sheriff Brody led his deputies into the factory complex. They found the serpents incapacitated, zip-tied, and waiting. Victor was secured, his face bruised, his arrogance replaced by shock and pain. The evidence of his operation, the ruined drugs, the stolen money, the hacked communications, it was all there, neatly catalogued by Mrs. Gable's remote work. The sun was beginning to rise as the last of the serpents were loaded into police cars. The town was waking up to a world transformed. News spread like wildfire, the serpents were gone. Defeated. In the immediate aftermath, relief washed over Harmony Creek like a cleansing wave. People emerged from their homes, tentative at first, then with growing confidence. They saw the police activity, saw Sheriff Brody standing tall, saw Frank and the other veterans quietly assisting. And they saw Arthur, standing off to the side, watching the dawn break, looking like just a quiet old man again. There were tears, embraces, expressions of gratitude. Sarah's diner became the unofficial gathering point, serving coffee and comfort. The burnt-out shop was already being assessed for rebuilding, neighbors pitching in. The fear was lifting, replaced by a fragile but potent sense of community and hope. Arthur shared a quiet moment with Sheriff Brody. They stood overlooking the town from a small hill. "You know," Brody said, "I've seen a lot in my career. But I've never seen anything quite like this. What you and your friends did, it was incredible." Arthur watched the smoke still faintly rising from the distant factory. "It had to be done, Sheriff. Some fights can't be fought with standard procedure. Some snakes need a different kind of exterminator." He paused, a flicker of something deep and weary in his eyes. "Violence, it's a terrible thing. It leaves scars, seen and unseen. But sometimes, it's the only language evil understands." He thought about the years he had tried to leave that life behind, the peace he had sought. It was disrupted, yes, but in disrupting it, he had restored it for an entire town. He hadn't just fought, he had protected. And that felt like the truest form of his old duty. "You taught them a lesson," Brody said, referring to the serpents, "but also the town." "I hope so," Arthur replied. "The real lesson isn't just that bad people get caught. It's that even the quietest among us can be strong. That standing together, even against overwhelming odds, is how you earn respect. Not by taking it, but by upholding it." Months turned into a year. Harmony Creek wasn't the same sleepy town it had been before the serpents, but it was stronger, more vibrant. The burnt-out shop was rebuilt, grander than before, a symbol of resilience. Sarah's diner was always full. Frank's auto shop was doing a booming business. Mrs. Gable started a community watch program, using her skills for neighborhood safety. Sheriff Brody, hailed as a hero, implemented new community-focused policing initiatives. The serpents were gone. Victor and his lieutenants were in prison, their network dismantled. The threat they represented had been neutralized not just by force, but by the community finding its courage. Arthur returned to his quiet routine. He still woke early, made his oatmeal, and read the paper on his porch. But now, when he walked through town, people didn't just see an old man. They saw the quiet strength, the deep wisdom in his eyes. They greeted him with genuine warmth, with respect earned through shared trials. He had found his peace again, not by hiding from the world, but by defending it. Harmony Creek had rediscovered its harmony, thanks to the unassuming old man who proved that the slowest pace could still be the most decisive, and that true power lay not in intimidation, but in the quiet, unwavering courage to protect what you love. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And tomorrow we have special story for you. Tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss.